Time for another board game review, and this time we have the game SiegeStorm Siege Mode. This was sent to me by Awaken Realms, and is designed by Camille Siesla and Marcin Swerkot. Why is this game cool? It's a fun card game that's easy to learn and very hard to master. You play against your friend or with your friend against a dangerous AI-controlled invader. The rules are fresh and inspired by digital castle defense games. You deploy units and they move in for victory. The box is stuffed with amazing illustrations and tons of fun cards. Isn't that enough? I suppose. Okay, let me show you how to play. So SiegeStorm is a card game of relentless assault, where armies rush forward and crash into each other's defenses, trying to deplete the enemy forces in a brutal war of attrition. You are a commander forced to make difficult choices. Every card in your deck is a resource you can use in multiple ways. Deciding which way will often be risky, painful, or both. There are no card types, counters, dice, numbers to remember, or complex rules to distract you from what matters most, bringing the pain to your enemy. To win the game, you must outlast your opponent by depleting his resources before he does the same to you. So each player has a deck. The game gives you starter decks, but you can also build your own, and you each draw 2 cards to form your starting hand. If you don't like your starting hand, you can return one or both of the cards to the bottom of your deck and draw new ones, but you can only do that once. Now, there are multiple modes in this game, but I'm going to show you a duel mode. This is a game of attrition, where you battle to deplete each other's resources. The winner is the first player to force their opponent to not have enough cards in their resource deck when they are required to draw. So let's say I put these cards back and drew 2 new ones. Okay, now, to play a card from your hand, you must first pay its cost, which is this big number in the top left. To pay a cost, you discard a number of cards equal to its cost and put them in your casualties pile, like your discard pile, basically. You may also use cards in your support zone to help pay the cost. We'll get into that in a second. If you don't have enough cards to pay the cost, you can't play the card. When the cost is paid, you then announce if you will play your card as an action or as a creature. So like this brainwashed trader here, if I play it as an action, my next shapeshift this turn could cost 0. Or if I played it as a creature, I will deploy it to the war track. You would place the creature here. You can deploy a creature only on your turn and only if your deployment zone is currently empty. You may deploy only 1 creature per turn. The only exception to this rule is when an action or ability allows you to deploy. As long as a creature remains on your war track, its passive ability remains enabled. If you have multiple cards in your war track with the same passive ability, those abilities stack. And if your passive ability has an activation cost, you may activate it at any time, and any number of times, as long as you have the cards and or supporters to pay for each activation. So this guy's passive effect is allies with shapeshift have +2 defense. So let's go over a turn sequence. First, you prepare. You reset any committed cards in your support zone. They can now be used again. Then you draw 2 cards from your deck. A note on your first turn, the first player draws only 1 instead of 2. Your hand limit is 10, and if you ever can't draw a card from your deck, you instantly lose. After you've drawn your cards, you advance all creatures in your war track up 1 space. If any creature moves out of the top slot, you immediately order it to storm, hold ground, or support. So let's say it was here, it would move up to that position. If your deployment zone is empty, you may play a creature and put it there. So maybe I could play a gutter crawler, which has 0 cost. Place him here. Cool. And then once per turn, you may take an extra turn if you played a card that allows you to do so. Then that's it. Now, when a creature is in this top position and it moves at the advanced war track phase, then you get to choose to either storm, hold ground, or support. If you choose storm, your creature assaults your opponent, dealing damage and performing its action. If your opponent has a card in their deployment zone, subtract a defense value from your attack value. So let's say this guy was here. So my guy has an attack of 2. This guy has a defense of 1. So if this guy gets storming, he will do 1 damage. Now, when you storm, you have 2 options. You can either target a creature, or you can target your opponent. If the opponent had any creatures on their front line or no man's land, then you could do the damage to the creature. But you can't target monsters in your opponent's war track, which is this here. If your attack strength is greater than the target creature's defense value, the target creature is killed, any leftover damage is lost. Or, instead, in this case, I'm going to target my opponent directly. So for 1 damage, my opponent has to discard from his resources a number of cards equal to his strength. So he has to discard 1 card. After you've stormed with the creature, you put your creature in your discard pile, or casualties pile. Now, instead of storming, you can actually choose to hold ground instead. You would then place a creature on your front line, or your no man's land, as long as that slot is empty. if your front line is already occupied, you may replace it with the card. Any cards that you place in your front line, you get to keep their passive abilities. So if you really wanted your shape-shifting allies to have better defense, you could, instead of storming, put this guy here and have that bonus. And finally, instead of storming or holding ground, you can make this a supporter. What you do is you place it face down in your support zone, and now this card is a supporter. From now on, you may commit the supporter once per turn to help pay for the cost of any card or ability. It's like mana, essentially. To do it, you tap it 90 degrees and subtract 1 from the cost of the card or ability you are playing. You can have an unlimited number of supporters in your zone, though each of these can only be committed once per turn. Sometimes cards have passive abilities that you can trigger using costs. In this case, it'd be 3 costs to negate an action or ability. So, oftentimes, your opponent will have an opportunity to react with their own action if you do an action. So, your opponent would pay the cost of 3, using either supporters or cards, and then it would block your action. Some cards, like Grand Overlord Ike here, if you play this card as an action, you can place any card from your hand on your front line, which is pretty neat. Otherwise, like in any other card game, the card text always takes precedence over the rules, because sometimes card effects can change how rules are played. But that's honestly pretty much it. You're just playing cards. On your turn, they shift up towards, and once they're here, you can try to storm your opponent, and every time you do damage directly to your opponent, you make them discard cards. Once their deck is gone, they're out. Of course, there are all sorts of abilities. I'm not going to go through all of them because there's, other decks I haven't even shown you, but just some example of what some cards can do. Like I mentioned, Shapeshift before. They actually give you keywords for all these, but Shapeshift, you get to, when you pay the Shapeshift activation cost, you return that card with Shapeshift to your hand and replace it with any other card in your hand for free, which is pretty neat. Here we have Sorsa, Mistress of Deceit. You can activate actions from all cards on your war track if you use her as an action, or if you play her in battle, you can make your opponent's actions cost 2 more. Also, she's very strong. Here we have Gutter Crawler. As an action, you could reset 2 of your supporters. You can get some more supporters for your cost. Or, this guy can attack 4 times when it storms. Pretty neat. Despoiler. Move a Despoiler from your casualties to your hand. This way you can get your monsters back from the dead. And then passive, once per turn, when an opponent suffers damage, you may reset up to 2 of your supporters. So yeah, that's it. You play cards, send them towards each other, hit each other. That's the game. So, there are elements to this game that I think are interesting, but it never really came together to deliver a sort of wowing experience for me. Like, it's fun, but it isn't amazing. Using a deck as your HP is a concept I've seen in other games, and it always feels a little too random and interfering for me. It's a cool idea in theory, because it's like, I'm running out of cards, but you also basically have no idea if you're going to lose a bunch of crucial cards with each hit. I do like the choice of either attacking with a monster or turning it into a supporter to pay for cards. Building up that sort of pool of cards you can tap to pay for other cards is satisfying, and it can make it so that certain cards don't feel like a waste of time. I like the variability also on how you can use the card as either an action or a fighter. I think that's pretty smart. I just feel like that having a starting hand of 2 cards is way too small for this kind of game. Because the cards cost discarding cards to play them, it usually just feels like you're stuck with whatever you draw. Because you can only draw 2 cards per turn. You only have 2 cards to start, and yeah, you can mulligan once, but it's still, but it's still only 2 cards. So it's like, okay, well, I put these 2 cards back, I got these, okay, I can't pay for these either. Guess I just gotta draw cards and hope that I can, pay for them at some point. Or it's like, okay, well, I'm just gonna play this because I can pay for it, because there's not that much choice in what I can actually play. And the game isn't long enough where I feel like it's worth stockpiling cards in my hand. And like I mentioned before, since you discard cards when you take damage, you just find yourself running out of useful cards and just playing cards. Okay, I'll just play this because I need to play something. There's good combo play in the game, and there's clever, mechanics. I don't think it's a bad game, and the actions and passive abilities are interesting, but the game is over so quickly and sometimes so randomly that oftentimes it didn't feel like a lot of it was within my control. There are some interesting mechanics, but overall it feels a little incomplete to me. Like, it's short, so it won't waste your time. And, you know, that's the point, right? It's kind of a breezy card game. But it feels a little shallow to me, and there's a little too much out of my control, I felt, to really, like, make this a sticking game for me. It's not bad, but not great.